Londres.
The Remain campaign has come up with a new argument. And it goes like this. Ooh! Don't even think of changing things. It's a big, scary, wide world out there. However rubbish the EU is, however expensive and corrupt and remote, always safer to stick with what we know. You know, I find that a fairly depressing argument. I mean, I can see why they're doing it, right? They don't want to talk about the amount of money we pay. They don't want to talk about the way the EU is collapsing as a share of the world economy. They don't want to talk about how our exports to the EU are tumbling virtually by the minute. They don't want to talk about the Euro crisis or the Schengen crisis, and they certainly don't want to talk about the pitiable deal that the EU was prepared to offer us. So I kind of get the risk aversion tactic. Still, there comes a moment when scaremongering topples over into overt falsehood, and that moment was reached with the publication of the Foreign Office's dossier on alternatives to EU membership. Now, the main thrust of their paper was to say the non-EU countries like Norway, Switzerland and Canada, these were the three they mentioned, all have worse deals than we do. And in order to try and make that argument, they made a number of misleading claims. The first point to make is these are obviously, I mean, you know, you don't need to be an expert in international relations to see that these are countries that are doing pretty well, right? I don't think it's that credible to say to people, oh, we mustn't be like Norway. Oh dear, we mustn't be as poor and wretched and miserable as the poor old Swiss. These are the wealthiest countries in the world. The Legatum Institute compiles a league table of GDP. It's called the Prosperity Index, and guess what? The richest country in the world is Norway, the second is Switzerland. Of course, money isn't everything. The United Nations does a Human Development Index, measures quality of life in terms of healthcare, literacy, longevity, and guess what? Same top of the league table. Number 1, Norway. Number 2, Australia. Number 3, Switzerland. So plainly, some kind of miserable, wretched life is possible in the shadows outside the EU. In order to try and put us off, the dossier says Norway has to apply 75% of all EU laws. Now that claim is, what's the word I'm looking for here? Oh yes, it's a lie. Let me read you the exact figures. These come from the EFTA Secretariat. Between the year 2000 and the year 2013, the EU had 52,183 legal acts. The United Kingdom had to apply every single one of them. Norway had to apply 4,724. That's not 75%, that's 9%. And in the case of Switzerland, there's no ambiguity at all. In Switzerland, the figure is 0%. Of course, the Swiss can sometimes choose to adopt similar standards to the EU for reasons of economy of scale, but it can never be forced to do so. And here is the absolutely key point. The peoples of those countries have set their faces absolutely against EU membership, not because they have perfect deals, but because they know that what they're doing, being in a free market but not a political union, works much better than what we're doing. Latest poll in Norway, 72% oppose EU membership, 18% favour it. In Switzerland, well, there was actually a referendum in Switzerland back in 2001. 77% of Swiss voted against reopening accession talks. For what it's worth, the latest poll there shows that 82% of Swiss citizens prefer the current trade deal to full membership. Now, I'm not saying that Britain would precisely mimic Norway or Switzerland. Of course we wouldn't. We have our own circumstances and needs. No two European countries that are outside the EU have identical deals with Brussels. Yes, they're all in a free trade area. Yes, they all have tariff-free commerce with Brussels, but they all do slightly different things. The Isle of Man does something a bit different from Monaco, which does something a bit different from Montenegro. Obviously, Britain is not going to exactly mimic anybody else. Actually, I think we'll get a much better deal. We're 65 million people to Switzerland's 8 million and Norway's 5 million. Unlike them, we run a big trade deficit with the EU. We buy from the EU much more than we sell there. And of course, we have the leverage of being an existing member. But even if the best we could get is a Swiss-type deal, it would plainly be a huge step up from where we are now. We'd be paying far less into the budget, we'd have much more control, we'd have our democracy back, we'd be able to trade freely with countries outside the EU, and of course, we would be a sovereign and self-governing democracy again. There's then one other argument that the dossier makes. It says, oh, trouble with Canada. Yeah, okay, they're getting a free trade agreement with the EU, but it took them 7 years to negotiate. Yeah. If you didn't, if you needed one more argument to leave the EU, how about that? It took us, therefore, 7 years to negotiate an FTA with a close ally like Canada, because that is the result of having Brussels run our trade policy. Who can doubt that we would do better as an independent state? There is a bright future out there for us, and it's global.